Minister Drive. The coalition government has seized on comments by Shadow Agriculture Minister Joel Fitzgibbon, saying he's confirmed that the ALP will reintroduce a carbon tax. Joel Fitzgibbon told Channel 10 that he didn't care if an emissions trading scheme was called a tax. The Shadow Agriculture Minister says the government is trying to run the same scare campaign as it did in the 2013 election, and it's time Australia had a mature debate about how to tackle climate change. Joel Fitzgibbon joins us now from his home in Cessnock, New South Wales. Good evening.
G'day, Patricia.
You say the government is playing semantics with your comments, but isn't the political home truth here that the idea of a carbon tax is electorally poisonous? And that was part of the downfall of Labor at the last election. So ultimately, the language is important.
And I said nothing to suggest that I approve of the use of the word tax in describing an ETS. I was simply frustrated because Andrew Bolt wasn't letting me get a word in, basically, and I was just trying to dismiss his false claim so that I could get on with saying what I was trying to say, and that is that the agriculture community, our farmers, desperately need the government to act on the impact of a changing climate on conditions in Australian agriculture. An ETS is not a tax, but it is a tool for lifting Australian agricultural productivity.
Even if the debate is unsophisticated and Andrew Bolt interrupted you a lot, haven't you made Labor's job of selling an alternative climate change policy harder by saying, you don't care if an ETS is called a tax, given it's such a loaded word?
Well, I called Andrew Bolt's continuing use of the word tax for what it was, and that was a scare campaign.
And are you scared?
Well, he's trying not to scare me. He's trying to, with the Prime Minister.
But it has been scaring the Labor Party. It's scary when it's used in campaigns against you, isn't it?
Well, we would just stick to the facts, Patricia. And the facts are that an emissions trading system is a system which allows us to work with the international community in a global effort to reduce carbon emissions at the lowest possible cost. I don't see why we should let Tony Abbott and others, including Andrew Bolt, get away with calling that a tax when it's clearly not. And I think Malcolm Turnbull, who himself today made that position quite clear and absolutely agreed with what I was saying in that sense.
So ultimately, what are you saying to your colleagues who think you've slipped up, that you need to be, having this debate and saying, we don't care what you say, we're not scared?
Well, I've had a look at the transcript of what I said, and I think it's a fairly poor construct of what I said, because what I was saying is I don't care what words Andrew Bolt uses in his naked attempt to scare the Australian community. And if you have a look at the transcript, that's exactly my target was Andrew Bolt and his absolute misrepresentation of what an emissions trading scheme is. So you don't regret the way you framed it in retrospect? Well, the news, the 6 o'clock news that night used it in a certain way, so I'm happy to concede that maybe I should have gone a bit harder on Andrew Bolt. But I was making the obvious point that I wasn't going to use his misrepresentation of an ETS as a means of scaring the Australian community. I wanted to get on and talk the facts, in particular how a changing climate is impacting on Australian productivity and Australian farmers, so many of whom are facing protracted drought. Now, you were, moving on to another issue, you were one of the first opposition frontbenchers to back a vote for boat towbacks. Will this issue come back again and again to haunt Labor, given your divisions on this are very deep? You've got the Deputy Leader, the Leader of the Senate, Penny Wong, really senior people who clearly don't think it's a very good idea. Well, it's very clear that Tony Abbott and others in the coalition want this to be an ongoing issue. Unlike them, we are only focused on doing one thing, and that is making sure Australia takes the most humanitarian approach to the problem with refugees, and in particular to ensure that flow of boats never commences again. And we decided at the conference that given the system seems to be working at the moment, we have no intentions of making any changes to that system which would cause the flow of boats to come again. On renewables, going back to climate change, what is Labor's position? Is it a 50% target by 2030, or is it an ambition to reach 50%? It's an ambition, it's an aspiration. But isn't that just flying a kite? I mean, we all have aspirations. You either try and reach something or you don't. Just the opposite. This is exactly what Barnaby Joyce's agricultural white paper should have been doing. It should have set goals and ambitions out to 2050. maybe put targets on where we wanted agriculture to be in both volume and value times. The New Zealanders do this, by the way. And from there, what you do is you use that as a guide in every policy decision you make. So the Labor Party is saying, well, in everything we do over the next 15 years, we want to create policy in a way, or in a lean policy in the direction, which will ensure, along with changing technologies, we've got far more renewables in the system than we have today. I think that's a very, very astute thing to do and a very responsible thing to do.
On RN Drive, my guest is Joel Fitzgibbon, the Shadow Agriculture Minister. What do you make of the comments that Joel has made on the Bolt program? Have they been taken out of context, or is it fair enough that the Prime Minister and others, including the Treasurer, raised this? 0418 226576 is our number. You can also tweet us at RN Drive. Tony Abbott says it'll cost $60 billion or more. Is that right? What are your figures? Because part of the problem here, isn't it, that you haven't actually modelled it? There was a policy announced without the necessary figures attached.
Well, Tony Abbott's claim is just rubbish, and the scare campaign.
But isn't the problem that he can make that claim?
Going into a frenzy already.
Isn't the problem that he can make that claim because you haven't modelled it properly and you haven't provided the figures that you would provide with a big policy announcement like this?
Well, this is the bloke that wants to increase the GST by 50%, not by 1 or 2 or 3%, but by 50%. So let's see him model what impact that's going to have on the Australian community, and more particularly on Australian households. Ours is an aspirational target. He's been very mischievous today. I think what he's done is thrown out a model suggesting what it would look like if we were increasing the renewable energy target to 50%, which is not what we've said at all. So it's a complete misrepresentation of Labor's position. Will
the figures be provided on how much it will cost?
Well, obviously, as I said, we've set ourselves goals and objectives, and therefore a strategic direction, which is the best way. That's the best place to start with public policy. And now, over the course of the next months and the lead up to the election, we will need to give some idea how we might, over that 15 years, meet those aspirations. And of course, as always, anything we do will be fully costed and will be upfront, as we were last time around when we introduced an emissions trading scheme, which, by the way, according to the experts, would have carbon part permits trading at about $10 today, and that would have a minuscule impact on consumer prices.
Part of the national conference for you was the first Country Issues Caucus and panel. Who spoke, and what's so significant about the ALP doing this?
Well, I've been working very hard, along with many of my colleagues, to redouble Labor's efforts in rural and regional Australia for two reasons. I don't hide a political objective. We want to represent in the parliament more rural and regional seats, but I also feel that many of the National Party MPs in particular, and Liberal MPs representing country seats, do take those electorates for granted, and I'm determined that we start putting more competitive tension into those seats, and in doing so, we create winners in the communities that are within those electorates. So it's a win-win, and at the conference, for the first time, we formalised Country Labor in the national platform. We had a fringe event there around Country Labor. We've now got a Country Caucus in Canberra, which allows like-minded MPs from the bush to work together and think together to develop policies and strategies together. I'm working with state Labor Party, the Labor Party at state level, to further build their infrastructure in each of those states. So Country Labor's on the march. We like to think there's a dividend in that for the party, but we also like to think there's a dividend in that for people who live in rural and regional Australia.
Labor lost a lot of trust in rural Australia when the live cattle trade with Indonesia was banned. Have you any concrete evidence that the ALP is able to capitalise on rural dissatisfaction with the Nationals, because this is becoming an increasing issue in some of those seats, or is it just independents that are going to end up benefiting again?
Oh, well, there's plenty of evidence. I mean, Tony Abbott's dislike for wind farms is one example. I've travelled the country, met with a number of farmers who are now receiving good income because they've allowed wind turbines to be built on their property. There's no better buffer against drought or other unpredictable weather changes than that. You've got the Shenhua mine in the Liverpool Plains causing a lot of grief. At the moment, you've got desperate people in the beef industry and the grains industry, because Barnaby Joyce has failed to show any leadership. And of course, we've got growing what the experts call spatial inequality. That means that the gap between the haves and the have-nots in rural and regional Australia is growing larger and more quickly than the gap between the haves and the have-nots in our capital cities.
Malcolm Turnbull has said that that those who say that an ETS is a tax are wrong, saying all measures which reduce emissions cost the taxpayer and could be classed as a tax. It seems that the Communications Minister is backing your position.
Well, and I thank him for his support today. It's very welcome.
But
Malcolm's
do you
been
think
very responsible?
What do you think of that tension within the Liberal Party?
Oh, well, I
will you
find it
exploit
disappointing,
it?
to be frank. The people in the Labor Party just want to act on this problem. And, you know, we had John Howard, Malcolm Turnbull and Brendan Nelson all on the same page for an emissions trading scheme. And if any one of those had remained in place, we would today have an emissions trading system up and operating. Tony Abbott, of course, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, now Bill Shorten, all support it. Tony Abbott is the only leader since 2006 that hasn't agreed that this country needs to act on carbon and needs to introduce an emissions trading scheme. He's always looking back, never looking forward.
I want to thank you for joining us, Joel Fitzgibbon.
That's a pleasure.